Hello, Josh. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. I'm
Good,
doing
good,
well.
good. So we're here with our friends who've joined us for our monthly webinar series, and this month in the July, we're going to talk about the hidden risk of paper-based transportation, which is always a great topic, and having a couple old fellas like us have been around a while, we've got our fair share of stories. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Binford Sloan, and I used to be a transportation director for about 25 years. Worked in the industry, grew up, from a kid into the business, and now I'm working with BusPlanner as their director of customer success. And joining us today is Mr. Joshua Hinerman. He is the state transportation manager with the Tennessee Department of Education. So, Josh, it's thank you very much, first of all, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here as our guest on our monthly webinar series.
Well, I'm humbled to be here with you guys today, for sure.
Yes, sir. So as I said, the two of us, we've kind of grown up in the business, and what we wanted to talk about was just really technology and how things have changed, right? I remember when I first got in the business, you were writing things down literally on notebook paper, and then it went to using a typewriter to type out the runs, and you remember we used to use yarn that you would go to a craft store and you would put push pins on a map on a wall, and that's how you would map out your bus runs, right? And then write them down. And so you think about how that worked in a different time, and then where we are now, and how you can have a problem, right? Because there's so many complexities out there today, and trying to keep up with all of it. Student accountability is another major, because there's so many complexities and levels around, students, and today, multifamily homes, multiple, enrollments, different schedules. I mean, it's not what it used to be, right? Incident documentation, incidents that happen out there. There's so much that you've got to go and work through, right? And then you've got your compliance. More and more states now are requiring some form of reporting, right? Whether it's for funding, for accountability, anything, statistics. And so you've got to have, a way to have a data repository. Auditing. There's so many different things. And we want to talk about all of this today with our audience, and how, we can help them. But Josh, talk a little bit about, reflect back on your time, right? When you were in transportation operations, right?
Well, when I think
about,
that, go ahead.
I just was going to say, talk about, how, with the forms and the binders, the clipboard, all that stuff going on, what the paper system looks like.
Well, the paper system is cumbersome. That's what I think of, and it was very stressful. Not that, and inefficient, I think would be the best way to describe the paper system. And for us, I think about, routes, having to go to a book. We had all these big master route books that were just full of handwritten notes. There was no consistency, on, well, this driver gives more descriptive detail and whatnot. And so when you were a sub driver having to go out and assist, because even back 15 years ago, we were having to fill bus routes and whatnot. It was hard. And for me, thinking about bus routes and whatnot, seeing that on a piece of paper versus, as you alluded to, the strings, I can remember asking the county highway department to give us these big maps. And I'd go through and we would highlight the zones, and then we'd go in and say, well, this is Route 30, this is 29, this is 16. But when there were route changes and whatnot, there wasn't an easy way to go and adjust route schedules and things like that. And so oftentimes we were working on outdated route sheets and whatnot. So that's what I think of. I can remember the writing down notes on a notebook and the binders. If you had something broke down, literally that's what we used, was a pad of paper, and just write down what was wrong with it. There was no further documentation about, who did the work, did it actually get done, or anything like that. So that's what I think about just back when in less complex days. And now we have technology that can assist us with a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah, and to your point, when you've got so many people out here, right? And let's just say if you had 10 different drivers, right? 10 different routes. When you're having to do it by hand, were they all, was it uniformly tracked, translated, stored? Probably not.
It was not.
I mean, not to say that it couldn't happen, but again, with everything else going on, it was so easy for things to slip through. And the other part of it too is the simple fact of the knowledge in somebody's head. And so, Miss Sally, dispatcher, been around for 25, 35 years. She knows every run, route, corner on the county road out there, and knows but what if something happens to her, right? Would the rest of the operation be able to pick up and take off using that paper system?
Not easily.
Not easily. Right.
It would have been a struggle. And and I can think of the dispatcher, Christy was ours back in the day, and she knew every route, like you said, by memory, and she would go out and run those routes and whatnot. And then of course she's the one, we only had to handwrite them. We would bring them into the office and someone else would type them out and whatnot. So there was a lot of repetitive work going on too, outside of just driving the school bus. You're over here trying to write all this information down and whatnot. The dispatcher did a lot of the typographical work for us after the fact. But, and I admit, most of the time we just did that once a year, and there was never another update in the routing. So that's what we worked off all year, whether it was right or not. Shamefully, I admit.
True. Yeah. And listen, we were, you and I came from that world. There's probably a lot of people on this webinar with today, same exact thing. And you're right. When you would go through this exercise 1 or 2 times a year, looking back on it now, I couldn't see it then, but I can now. We actually had to work harder in the summertime to get ready for the next school term, because why? We had to play catch up for so much that we hadn't done.
I would say when new students were reassigned to you and whatnot, it wasn't like at the beginning of the year where you're able to, with the routing software, where every student in the district lives, but you didn't know that. We would just run our routes the way we did the year prior until someone called and said, oh, we need to go down this road over here because there's a family that moved in. But we wouldn't have known that because the student information system that the district used, it doesn't communicate with a paper system.
Very true. Very true. These are all just really good points. So I guess, when you look at blind spots, right? And we talked about this in the beginning. Student accountability is one of those, and we've been going through these. I mean, what are some of the things here that you recall, again, when you were in your previous life on the other side, that really, looking back on it, you're like, oh wow, we could have been stuck in this particular predicament?
I think the big one would have been when we had accidents, not knowing who was on the bus at the time. And I'd like to say that our radio systems were, the best that we had, but that was not the case. And we didn't have cell phones early on in the day, not everybody, at least. So accountability, I think, is the biggest one. When or the other thing is they would radio and say, hey, did you drop the student off? Well, I don't know, because they weren't on a route sheet and we didn't have a way to go quickly to find that. And so you're radioing 3 or 4 different buses trying to figure out where the kid's supposed to be. And so that's what I think about accidents, and then the lost children, being able to quickly just go to, like with the routing software, you can just type a name in and it goes straight to who the bus is. That's not necessarily the case. We had route sheets, and Christy would go in and create master lists of names of students and then assign a bus number to them. But that's only effective if they're on they stay there and never move during the year. But it was not a good system. It was a cumbersome and a laborious process to be able to maintain that.
Yeah, very, very much so. I totally agree. And I think for me, the one that would always give me those, pit in the stomach moments was again that lost child. And you could not rapidly find where they were. And in the radio system, because I remember in one of my earlier districts, they didn't even have the money to purchase a radio system. So you had to rely on cellular technology, which today everybody's got a cell phone. But back in the early 1990s, very few people had cell phones. So you weren't able to get a hold of bus drivers as easily. You had to wait until they got to a school or some common place where, you could get word out, through a landline phone or whatever for them to call in to ask questions. So, you know, in what now we're able to figure out with a lost kid in a matter of seconds or maybe a minute or two at most. And I think that's even pushing it today in 2026. But back then you may go 30, 50 minutes in some cases before you knew. And that was a major blind spot for me anyway.
And I would say that I can't think of the times where a parent that we would just say, and we would never do that today. They would be familiar enough. We could tell them the roads that the bus should be on, and they would
Mm-hmm.
go find the bus to say, oh, yeah, they're on the bus. They're sleeping. Or they would be waiting at the bus driver's house because, again, we didn't have the radio and you didn't have the cell phones. And so you'd show up. Things today that we would never encourage a parent to do.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and you mentioned this is another blind spot, incident documentation. And you brought up a good one a few minutes ago about accidents, right? When those happen. What are some things that kind of hone in on with you thinking back to incident documentation?
So back in the day, just the I don't know, like we had a simple little form, but it was a less complex time. Like when you had an accident, you didn't deal with, like, I can't remember like all of the student data, trying to gather their names, dates of birth, addresses, phone numbers, like parent name, like all this information wasn't readily available. And so a good bus driver back in the day, I had little cue cards where I would handwrite in all the information, but that took weeks to gather. And then when you're in an accident and the state troopers wanting all this information given to them on a nice, neat looking form, it was stressful trying to then transcribe all that information. Whereas I think technology today, I'm driving down Tom Austin Highway at this point, and whatever bus is using that, our technology would assist us in that. That's probably where I think when we're in an accident as bus drivers back in the day, the absence of technology required us to, in an already overwhelming moment, to have to do a whole lot of extra work. And I think sometimes that was at a cost of not seeing to the children the way we probably should have, because we were so busy trying to do all the required paperwork that was going to be asked of us when the state troopers showed up. So that's what I think about with accidents back in the day, to not now with technology for those that are using it. It's so much easier.
Yeah, it is. You're right. You can literally pull it right up directly from a cell phone, and you can even send it to the troopers so that they don't even have to sit out there on the scene, and then they can put it right. There's the methods of being able to do it now compared to back then it is night and day, literally. I think one thing though that from as you said back in the day, one thing I do feel like was better. I don't, well, maybe I shouldn't use the word better. It was different. You had more of a personalized approach between a driver and students as you do today in some cases, because today it's a much more fluid society,
Mm-hmm.
in and out. And back then, there was more of the, 5 day a week, 180 days out of the year, from, kindergarten right on up through 12th grade, and the same person they rode with. And so that is one thing I would say was a positive that I recall seeing. You didn't see the volume of incidents that you do now. At least I didn't anyway, compared to. So, blind spot number 3, compliance and reporting. Now, this is a real big one, right? And you and I have both been there where, we have to go through and collect all these pieces of data, right? And whether it's data for funding, data for service requirements, data for, the accidents we were just talking about, being able to pull all that. And that in itself can take an enormous amount of time, especially on a paper system, so what are some of the things that come to your mind, thinking back through that and that
I
blind
can
spot?
remember. I can remember as a bus driver, not when I
Mm-hmm.
was in the office, the annual counts, and we
Yep.
would do that for an entire week, counting in the morning, counting in the afternoon, and then they did. You had to remove your deadhead miles. We had to turn in sheets by hand. We had to maintain how much fuel. We didn't have a fuel card to put in. You just went and got, they had these tanks, you could get the fuel, but you had to hand write out how much fuel you used for each bus and calculate the mileage. And that was stuff we were doing. And then we would submit to the supervisor. And I can tell you that was tiring. And of course, you learn to do that a little bit every week. But the head counts, that was a stressful time. And
Oh
I don't know that
yeah.
we mentioned it earlier. I think about too, when I think about too, when we had accidents, the cue cards that I mentioned, I never thought once, Binford, about confidentiality. Here I had all this information about students and it just stayed in the little seat pocket. I never even thought about that as a driver. Now that as I'm in a supervisor role, I think about that. But back then I didn't, those things didn't come to mind. And then the invisible, when we talk about that invisible cap there, another thing, when we did those student counts, I'm not certain that we were always as honest as we should have been with that. We would inflate some of our numbers because all bus drivers, hey, I don't want any extra kids. I don't want you to change my route. And so they would count students, like we only counted students in the morning, but when do students traditionally ride? The greater population's afternoon, but for state reporting, we only calculated morning routes data. And so that was a frustration.
Yeah. We so you're right. And I don't mean to chuckle, but you're right. Nobody wants to get extra kids. They don't want to get any cutbacks on the runs, but we had to count our kids both morning and afternoon. And you would have to go through and North Carolina, they had this formula, and you had to go through the whole week, and then you had to get the averages and pull it all out. Guaranteed you were going to have some where the math didn't line up, because why? You're doing it all by hand. And so you're going through, and first it starts with the bus driver, and they go through and they fill out all their totals and sign, and then they give it to their supervisor, and the supervisor's looking over it. Well, in the meantime, then the phone's ringing or somebody's walking in the door, and you get sidetracked. And so, yeah, looking back on it, it is where there were holes in the system, but it was what you had to work with at the time. And it may have worked to your advantage, then again, it may not have worked to it. So,
I was going to say on that note, when you think about the reporting of the mileage, the drivers would turn those in monthly, and then somebody in the office would calculate. And I remember one time the supervisor mentioned, he says, how are we 300,000 plus miles over from what we had the month before? And it was all because of a clerical error. And it was just but going back and trying to find where that clerical error was, that took a lot of time for somebody.
oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, because any of us, I, I make them. We can all make them. It's so easy to do, and I think the other part too that you brought up is so important. Talking about the driver, personal, the cue cards you call them. And that really was, and I didn't think about it until literally you were talking just now, but we did the same thing. And our buses would literally sit on schoolyards, and they didn't have locks on them. Anybody could walk up on them. So like if you were at a high school, Friday night football, everybody in town comes in there. You don't know who's up on these buses reading stuff. And at the time you didn't think about it, but now it's a big thing, real big
Hmm.
thing. So, now as we sit down and we talk about how you can start to assess your operation, right? For potential areas of weakness or vulnerabilities, you should say. Giving yourself the litmus test here, right? So, the drop off test, for example. If somebody was to ask you about a drop off from 3 weeks ago, how long until you can answer that question with confidence?
I was going to say, without technology, I don't know that you can ever say with full confidence, because we're going to go back and just from a driver's seat, if you called and said, Josh, what time did you make it to Safety Management Street on Tuesday? Well, I'm going to say I should get there at 2:20. I'm going to give an approximation. Whereas with the use of technology, if you're using GPS or here comes the bus or some type of tracking app, you're able to go in there, oh, here it was, and you're able to give that actual information. Otherwise, I think we're always going to give some type of an approximation or an estimate.
Yeah, I don't see how you could effectively do this without technology.
And
For
how do we
sure.
know the child rode the bus? We
That's
wouldn't,
it.
because
That's
we're not
it.
taking attendance.
That's it. So yeah, so like part A, like you said, you got to have GPS, but part B is if you had student ridership where you were scanning off and on to go with the GPS, right?
Hmm.
Would be really the only way that you could definitively be able to answer that. The departure test, a key staff member leaves next week. How much process knowledge walks out with them, right? This was the examples we were talking about earlier. I used Sally and you had your dispatcher, Christy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, same thing.
And I'm going to say, when Christy finally retired after 40 plus years, they hired 3 people to replace her. That's how much knowledge went out the door.
Mm, yeah, it's a lot. And I would say, I would be interested if we had this as a poll question. How many how many organizations have people like this right now today? I think we will be surprised to see the answers.
Well, I can say, just from where in my role right now, having visited multiple districts across our state, there are a lot of supervisors that are at that point that they are approaching retirement, and they're, I'm just going to say, the local LEA, they haven't taken a really proactive approach to trying to get someone in there before these individuals leave. Because as you and I know, it's not just about routing. You've got legal compliance, you've got training requirements,
Mm-hmm.
you've got drug and alcohol, like you've got all these other things, plus maintenance and the purchasing of buses. Like, there's so many things we're responsible for, and sometimes I don't know that our leaders always understand the complexity of the work we do. And the routing part is by far that's I think the most complex aspect, and probably the most difficult, specifically at this time of the year, as districts across the nation are preparing to return to school if they've not already started.
Yeah, yeah, we've got there's quite a few that we work with that are starting back next week and the week after. So yeah, it's we're here. It's upon us for sure. The next one, state request and incident summary tomorrow, right? Where where would that data come from? That's another one that, again, with the old paper system, would be, not saying impossible, but you would be hard pressed to be able to get it to them, on short notice.
Yeah, I can think of the statement that the public information officer would say. He said, "We just don't have that data, and if we don't have it, we can't give it." But is that
Right.
an acceptable answer? Not really.
No, no, not in 2026. It's not. So, you know, so as you think about, wanting to do this shift away from paper, right? I think, looking at this right here, I definitely would agree. Pick one gap. Don't try to bite off the whole elephant at one time. Start methodically. And maybe it's start in the area that you could achieve first, right? Because you got to get some quick wins, and then from there build upon that to grow out. I mean, I don't know what your thought would be on that, Josh, but that's just something that popped into my head.
I would agree. When we think about paper, what can paper do to help us? Like getting the routes. Like for me, if I were looking at some type of technology, and I were on paper route sheets, getting all that transferred over to the routing software in and of itself allows us to have better accountability, visibility. It's going to allow us to see things that we haven't discussed already, which would be our inefficiencies. Where can we adjust routes? Hey, we got this really bad driver shortage. So is there somewhere where we can move students and do that quickly? Well, you know what? Now we can visually see all this stuff, and in the matter of just a few clicks, you're able to make these adjustments along with bail time studies and whatnot, just to see what can we do, what are the alternatives are available to allow this operation to take place. And of course, I know you say start with one, and so that's what I would do, but I can't speak for what others would do. And then I think two, I would say most of the softwares that are available today offer some type of system that allows you to manage all of your employee records. And that's a huge one too, being able to just to have one click, and that's where your repository of information's at. And you can set schedules and reminders and all that. We used to do all that on a calendar. We had it all marked. We had a DOT calendar. We had a physical calendar. When the randoms, all these things were all done manually on in the supervisor's office. You'd have all these calendars that you would look at. You needed a day off, you had to go put it on the time off request calendar. And we didn't do that on a computer, and you didn't do that with a text message. It was all manual.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. There's so much out there, and I know, for those that aren't already on BusPlanner, the ones that are would know this, but the ones that aren't, that's one of the big pieces of our package is to do that staff training, that tracking, right? So you could, track all their demographic information, hire dates, their certifications, when they went and got their CDL renewals, DOT drug testing you brought up. All of this could be tracked. And the great thing about it is that it was also give you who's getting ready to expire, whether it's for CDL or their upcoming DOT physical that's in there, who's short on training hours for the quarter or for the year, depending on how your state works through it and those requirements. But yeah, I agree. They're out there, and it's for sure you can definitely make it easier. And I think this is another one too, is habit. Once you get into starting to shift away, is don't necessarily the bad, but form the good habits, right? Because I'm so big into data, and people that know me know this. I'm always talking about the health of your data, turns into the success of your organization, hands down. And when you have, how do you get healthy data? It's from having those habits, right? To be able to go in and work the data, find the weaknesses, fix those, make it better. So moving forward, you don't have the same struggles over and over. But it all starts with building out those processes and habits. So again, I don't know what your thoughts are around that, Josh. That's just kind of what pops in my head when I
Yeah,
read that point.
I was just going to say, bad data in, you're going to get bad results.
Right.
And at the end of the day, having started in a district with 40 drivers where we did everything on paper, to my last district where we had over 100 routes and 200 employees, I can't imagine a day where I wouldn't use some type of technology, because this data that you're talking about allows us to go tell our story, and it allows us to be more efficient in and I can't speak for all transportation directors, but at least here, it seems like we're seeing budget dollars are becoming more and more scarce, And so there's that reality that every dollar that we asked to use to operate our transportation programs, those are dollars we're taking away from a classroom. And so being mindful of how technology, if utilized correctly, because if you just have it and you don't use it, well, it's a waste, and it's using a resource. So that's how I see that. Making those good habits, you put good data in, you're going to get good data results that will allow you to run reports that will tell a story and make our life less complicated. And then, unfortunately, we're seeing more and more about reductions in workforces, and that's where technology can come in and assist you in your operation, which what used to be really complicated that it may have required 5 or 6 people. A piece of technology can come in and make that less complicated if we had to have those really uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly, for sure. And I think the last part of this is grow, embrace the technology, and do it at not only your pace for you personally, but for your organization, and more importantly, for your stakeholder, right? Because you've got different stakeholders in your community. It could be schools, it could be, your drivers, it could be your parents, right? And all of these pieces. And so I think that's another thing that for me that really helped when I was, moving to the technology world, during my career, and being able to work, because again, with BusPlanner, right? It's so much. It's not. And you mentioned this earlier. It's not just about bus routing. It's the fleet maintenance. It's the driver training. It's the purchasing. It's all of these pieces and so many more that every single transportation operation is working through on a daily. And being able to have a total transportation management or total transportation operations system to be able to help you do that, that can really take so much of the stress off of any person that's out there.
And I was going to say, you mentioned technology. One of the things that I had to do in the beginning, if it seems like back in the earlier days, transportation, I don't want to say we were an island to ourselves, but we were really out there on our own, doing our own thing.
We were.
We didn't get the newest technology. We didn't have, I can think even just back to a few years ago, we were still using Microsoft Works instead of Microsoft Office. But building those relationships with those stakeholders, board members, superintendent, the finance office, and then most certainly, you've got to get the buy-in with technology, because if they say no, well, all the others not going to work. And so I think that's really critical when we start this process. And then, as you said, small steps. You don't have to do all those things. I can remember when we got routing and how excited I was. But then I heard about student tracking and fleet maintenance and all this, and I wanted all of those things, but it was very small steps, and how grateful I am that we did all of that, but we did it in very small steps. And then you think about student tracking, getting parents' involvement. And I wasn't certain how they would feel about that when we first got that, but man, oh man, once they got it, like when that system went down, wowee, you knew that they were using it. It involved that buy-in, and so that goes back to your data. If you talk about the conversation, we want to expand to student tracking. Well, if your routing data is not correct, you might as well not even do the student tracking until you get that all where it's supposed to be.
Right.
So,
it's a lot. For sure.
A lot of moving pieces, literally. I mean, we think about transportation being such a mobile organization, but there's a lot of moving pieces, even in the technological world, that helps us do our work today.
Yeah, moving pieces on a lot of different levels simultaneously. So, I guess, key takeaways, it's a lot of times it's what you can't see, right? What's beneath the surface of the water. That's where those real risks are that you can see. It's not going through the paper itself. It's what's not in it, what you can't see, right?
Mhm.
And then, as we talked about those blind spots that are out there, and you and I were both thinking the same thing, and the audience shared with it, being able to do that compliance, being able to do the reporting and auditing. Those are the big ones that people want to do. And then as we just talked about, starting small. But you gotta get started. You can't keep sitting on the sideline saying, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next month. I'll do it when the kids get out of school next year," because there's no guarantees in life. No guarantees. And it's not a matter of if something can happen in a place. It's a matter of when it's gonna happen, where it's gonna happen. Guarantee. So, and then, look for the wins. All right, turn those in, and you really will make your organization a much stronger moving forward than where it is now, for sure. So, those are some key takeaways. But anyway, Josh, I think this was great. I mean, is there any other closing thoughts that you've got that we didn't cover that you think we should bring up with the audience right now?
I can't think of any. I think we've covered most of the stuff, most of the items that I can think of whenever we're thinking of moving from that old antiquated paper-based system to moving towards a more technologically advanced operation. I would encourage supervisors out there to embrace some of our, and I know that was one of the things that I did, was trying to embrace when you're
Mm-hmm.
considering the hiring of individuals. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's about, I'm going to try to bring some younger folks that are in, if possible. And that's hard when you create some new positions that have a really high focus on technology and their application. But the long and short of it is, a lot of us, at the veterans of the group,
Mm-hmm.
I like technology. I like what it can do, but I don't fully understand it all the time. And so having some younger folks in there that can say, "Oh yeah, that's real easy," and then they just go do it like second nature. They pick up on those things. They've been raised in a world that computer screens and technology are everywhere they go, but that was not the case for us. The party lines, the manual lines, the busy signals, dial up, that you weren't sure you were going to get internet. Like, it's just two different worlds. And so I think successful leaders have to bring that younger view and perspective in and embrace it, and as uncomfortable as it may be, if we want to be successful, because technology is here, and our parents today, they are much different than the parents of years gone by. Their expectations are a lot higher for us. Not that our parents didn't have high expectations, but not like the parents today, when they want information and they want it now. So
Yeah, yeah. Very points. Very well said. Very well said.